Yo, we're live this afternoon because it's my birthday weekend and I needed some more time. So yeah, howdy, how y'all doing? Who have we got so far? There's a bunch of people there. All right, so we got Cactus Corey, we got Baked as Ducks, Mr. Can of Candy, Here We Grow, Aussie Autos, Josh Bridle, Acme Genetics, Drop Bear Genetics, Grows Clover, Aussie Autos Official, Sweet Baby May, Dank Panda, Sea Cliff Organics, Will Smithhurst, Grow Green Daddy, Dank Magic Candy, Josh G, Josh D Creative, and the Soil Farmer. Yeah. All right. Cool. Hope everybody's had a terrific and fantastic Sunday thus far. Hello to Controlled Chaos. Everybody on the Discord, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, wherever you're watching from. Thank you. I'm feeling a lot better this week. No more or less flu than last week. It's basically gone now. Get out of cause. So yeah, we might rehash some of the stuff that I was maybe a little bit less focused on last week with regard to sort of early flower up until say mid-flower, maximizing some of that. What you gonna do? Good day to you and Controlled Chaos, Seahorse, all of you guys. It's going to be a double coffee live stream, this one. Alrighty, so leading on from the fast veg phase sort of thing. So we talked in that about not losing steam, so sort of sending them in charging into flower so that you have nice vigorous plants that are just sort of wanting to explode from the get-go. So what do you do once you get them in there? Firstly, you're going to want to make sure that your roots and everything like that are in good condition leading up to this point. So really it's about staging. Oh, good. It's decided to do that cool Zoom thing it did last week too. So that's awesome. Let's see how long it takes to stop this time on Instagram, or if I have to close it and reopen it. Hello, Brental, Sweet Organics, and Umbra. How are you guys? Do you like my ultra close-up? There you go. It went away now. The wonders of technology, simply amazing. So yeah, setting a lot of the hard work is done really in the veg phase. Once you get them into the final location, I think it's a good idea to give things a bit of time to settle in there before you flip. Not a huge fan of just potting things up and then flipping them straight away. So give them some time. I mean, this might be as simple as, 3 days if that's all you've got, but a week, sometimes a little bit over a week, that can really make or break a lot of varieties, especially ones that are slightly less vigorous. In general, the more vigorous the variety is, the less of that you can get away with. So, you wouldn't, for instance, attempt the same sort of thing with a haze hybrid that you would with a heavily interbred blueberry, right? Just Organic, Rossi G, and yeah, you've got to love the bucket hat and shades combo this week. Andre the Giant too. So making sure, especially in organics with soil, that you've got enough root mass there to kind of support what's going to go on. It's not like you need the pot packed out with roots for it to work, but you don't, because you're not feeding salts, you want to make sure that there's enough stuff, microbiology and just general biomass there to make it all happen effectively. There's sort of a bit of a teetering point in terms of you can go too far. And like I've mentioned before, you can kind of lose steam. So in general, I like a larger container than a smaller one. But yeah, even then, if you're good with top dressing or applying supplementals, you can get away with a lot smaller containers than you would sort of normally advise. Always growing. Cool to see you. So in terms of top dressing and supplemental feeding, I do like to top dress around the start of flower. So after that settle in phase, whether it's re-amended soil, used soil, even a lot of the time new soil, that'll affect how much I would top dress in terms of dosage, but I still like to stimulate the soil yeah, at that sort of earliest point in flower. So during the stretch phase, I'll apply a top dress. If I'm short on time, it'll just be a simple, top dressing of normally the Herb Superb Balance and a bit of Stone Age. If I've got a bit more time, I will mix, about 2/3 of that dose with an appropriate amount of castings, normally about twice the amount of the dry amendments, and sort of, moisten that down and let that do its thing in a container where it can breathe for, 10 days, 7 to 10 days is normally enough. It's kind of a pre-activation thing that I've been doing, but yeah, that seems to help in terms of if I do that at the same time as potting the plants up during that settle in phase, by the time that's completed, then that top dressing is ready to just apply. And I get a more immediate response from that than waiting until the 10th day and applying it then. I'll still get a good response, but it's kind of a bit of a faster one if you pre-activate. One there from Aussie Autos, bigger pot, bigger battery. Yeah, it does. So more reserves there, because you've got to imagine with your root system, like with an organic soil, a living soil, you've got your roots, you've got to have room for everything around there that's going to contain the food, moisture, all that sort of stuff. But you've also got to have room for the microbes and things that live on, in and around the roots that perform all the functions. So you need just more space. You can't just have a container packed out with roots. You kind of can with salts, because you're just feeding a salt solution in there that the roots don't really have much choice whether they absorb or not. But yeah, an organic soil situation is different from that. When they're from Blaze Ducks, does branch size matter before you flip? It does, yeah. It depends on the variety. So obviously, they vary widely in terms of their growth habits, structures, vigor. So that knowing a bit of that history or all that sort of stuff is important in terms of your strategy. Otherwise, you're kind of guessing a lot in terms of what size do you flip, how do you train it. You can learn a lot even in the first run just from observing them, but having some of that prior knowledge of kind of how those plants grow is a good way of sort of, preempting this stuff. And what I find particularly with organics is if you can try and stay ahead of things by, 7 to 14 days, then you'll sort of kick ass every time. When you get behind the 8 ball on stuff, it's harder to catch up. So yeah, there might be some varieties you might be able to go 12-12 from seed, for instance, and still achieve a largish sort of a plant that's worthwhile doing. Whereas other ones might need 5 to 6 weeks of veg. It really can sort of vary that much. Luke AJ, Aaron Chester, Tarek, and the Sheer Organic. Cool. Yeah, so sort of know your clone or know your plant, know what you're messing with sending into flower is also important. But yeah, whether it's fresh soil, the light soil, anything like that, I like to augment whatever's going on there with a bit of a top dressing. Some people will do a nutrient tea around that time in lieu of or in addition to that. That's not necessarily the approach that I use most often, because I don't know, unless there's a specific reason for me to get the brewer out, I normally don't. I'll normally just top dress stuff. But yeah, so applying it around then to sort of maximize that stretch period. Some of it is applying food, but a lot of it is just applying things that are going to stimulate the soil in general, and active breakdown is a good way of doing that. So on a fresh soil, I might not be applying very much at all. 1/4 of a cup, for instance, on a 40-litre pot is plenty. Later on, it might be a 1/2 cup or a full cup, depending on how many times I've used the soil, what the plant looks like, that sort of thing. But yeah, that is one time that I will definitely apply some additionals. I find helps tremendously. And then the next time I would apply it wouldn't really be until around the mid-flower point. So again, it's going to vary based on the variety. You can't, the midway point on a 12-week variety is different to that on a 7-week variety. So yeah, but trying to time something around mid-flower point is also a way to maximize the swell. So once the stretch is stopped, you can sort of then move on to trying to support the building side of it and the ripening side of it. In terms of, like I mentioned, I use the premixes a lot. So that would be, in terms of our range, the Herb Superb and the Stone Age is typically what I'll use. If you had to break it down to individual stuff, some of the things that I find really good in the early flower phase is, of course, your kelp, your alfalfa. So, I mean, your cytokines, your triacantanol, the malted barley, so for your enzymes, bone meal, whole fish meal. I like early in flower, whereas I'll sort of more use to sort of move more towards fish bone or regular bone meal or a combination thereof. Those are sort of some of the things that I like earlier on. In terms of plant meals, hemp seed meal's great, coconut meal's great. So frass is another good one, and there's some science to sort of support frass increasing quality as well. Those are sort of some individual things that you might be able to apply that'll provide food, but also provide some other stuff along with it. Is there a particular moisture level that they thrive? In terms of percentage, I mean, I wouldn't really put a percentage point on what would be optimal for everything. In general, what I find is that keeping the soil at an even and consistent moisture level. So dry back, for sure. You don't want a swamp, but you don't want to allow it to get fully dry either. So that's going to cause like a lot of swings in blooms and then collapses in populations, which cause swings in pH and nutrient levels, even just the function of the soil. So trying to keep that relatively even is generally the go. 5, 10, 15% dryback is about really all I'd normally allow. And I don't ever water really to run off unless there's a reason to. The very first watering I ever do, when I just fill pots with fresh soil out of a bag, I will, because sometimes there's a tendency to get dry pockets, especially in a peat-based media. But after that point, once I'm satisfied that it's moistened down fully, I don't. I just sort of try and maintain field capacity, if that makes sense. Oh, ITL. Nice to see you, bro. In the loop. So yeah, if you can keep it even, like if you, in terms of if you think some of the most active spots in your garden were normally under a fairly thick layer of organic mulch, and the temperature, the temperature, the moisture level, all that sort of stuff stays relatively calm, relatively even. And that facilitates, for your fungi and all that sort of stuff, facilitates their growth. If you get too much dryback, things will sort of, it's not like they disappear a lot of the time, but they more go to spore, and then that population's got to bounce back from that. It shifts and changes the kinds of microbes in the soil. So yeah, it's better to try and just keep it at a sort of homeostasis, something like that, Caspar's Organics, and we've got Gary Kingery on the YouTube from Big Mackenzie River. That's cool as hell. OFYB for life. Yeah. Yeah, so stability in your environment, stability with your soil, and then your microbes are going to always be functioning, doing their thing, and then your plant's normally always going to have what it wants when it wants it. That is also why larger containers are a much more stable environment, because you can imagine big plant, small container, it's kind of using the moisture levels, it's packed out with roots, it's sort of subject to wide swings, whereas an appropriately sized plant in a large container is just by and large a lot more stable. And yeah, stability is yields. So yeah, and it's time for the weekly let's lock Cody out of the live feed while we're using it. Yeah. It'll let me back in now. I'll figure this out eventually. There we go. Sweet. All right, cool. It's got to do it every single time now. I really should do that. Hey, yeah. I mean, shout outs to Sticky Blooms for this one. This is a good one. This is reversible too, so you can, you can rock the cam side or whatever. I was filming this side today. I felt it was a very Hunter S. Thompson sort of a look. But yeah, I don't know. Like everything with us, Caspars, it's soon. Soon. So yeah, in terms of soluble stuff, like say if you're using the Island Blend, or even if you're really wanting to augment the light soil, or you've got autos, right, and you're trying to maximize that stretch. I don't continue using the aquamarine grow in that phase. I'll swap it over straight away as soon as that change is made. So, I mean, with an auto, as soon as there's any visual sign of flowering, I take that as flip. And with your photo period plants, anything that, basically as soon as that light cycle is changed, I'll swap it over to the bloom. And yeah, that's an appropriate way to sort of boost the soil. In terms of the microbe packs, it'll be Mojo from the start, because always Mojo. And, antimatter once a week. That is also generally, like, I'll normally root dust with dark matter around the time of transplant. That's sort of around a time when it's good to get that in. So if you're not someone that root dusts or applies it to your pot as you're potting up, when you go to feed, use a dose around that first week. Minimizes shock and transplant stress, but also seems to really help facilitate that sort of breakdown of your phosphorus and all that sort of stuff. It's a good time to put it in there. Well, cool. There's one. I got to find some people to get some other ones. Hydro Haven's joined. Cool to see you, dude. Yeah, so during that phase two, it's important to remember that the plant ramps up a lot of its usage of water and things like that. So it might catch you by surprise, because they use a fair bit in veg, but it might catch you by surprise how quickly they start needing moisture more often. So, I mean, if you're using blue mats, things like that, it can be a time around that late stretch to stretch stop when you might want to check that your blue mats are actually keeping up. Sometimes they'll get a little dry, and then that seems to affect the way that they work properly. With your sub-irrigated planters, make sure that you're sort of keeping the moisture levels in there appropriate. And if you're manually watering, keep an eye on that. You might have to adjust. You might be 10% watering more often than you thought you would. But generally, once they swap to the building phase, it calms down a little bit. So again, keep an eye on that, because you don't want to just continue watering like crazy if they're not in a position to be using that. And that can make a huge difference to your yield, because maintaining oxygen levels in your soil, you get better growth of your microbes, which help break down your fertilizer and help your roots breathe. The oxygen helps your roots breathe. So yeah, that's pretty important. Oh, Gumby, nice to see you, dude. Yeah, so a strong, healthy veg phase leads into a strong and productive flower phase. In terms of training, so that's going to really, again, be very variety dependent. So there's some varieties that really just do not like any form of training, topping, anything like that at all. You do that to them and it's almost always of detriment. And then there's a lot of other ones that really enjoy that. So if you're going to do things like scrog, you really should be starting your training early on in the veg phase. So from sort of about the fourth node, starting to do something then. But that said, a lot of people, run things a bit larger and then sort of do a bit of pruning, topping, that sort of stuff in early flower. Do that before you flip. Don't sort of be messing around with things once they've started to make structure, because, yeah, you will really kind of just mess up the look of it. If you ever try and prune or tip things too late in flower, it just never really seems to go that well. And you're bunching and all sorts of stuff. forms strange looking things. Solo cup or die. Solo cup challenge for life. Everyone's got to run a solo cup every so often. But yeah, I suppose attention, keeping in mind that, you won't be able to spray really past the first week. Ideally, you shouldn't be spraying in flower at all. But, past the first week to 10 days, you really shouldn't be spraying anything. So cleanliness, observation, and yeah, just sort of monitoring the plants on a daily or near daily basis is going to yield the best results. Keeping your flowering temperatures stable as well. It's coming up towards the colder months here, like it's still been fairly warm, but it is going to get colder, and people that are using LEDs don't have that radiant heat that the lamps offer. So your soil can kind of slow right down if that's the case. So get some heat going in there, whatever that means for you. Some people use greenhouse heaters, bathroom heaters, whatever you've got. Keep it away from a water source, but yeah, you want to maintain all that so that you can the whole way through, because you don't want to sort of start it at a certain point when the temperatures are just sort of borderline, and then as it gets colder and colder and colder, it slows down. It can kind of wreck your yield a bit. So if you're somewhere that it gets real cold, yeah, keep a good eye out for that. In terms of pulling nitrogen way back, it's not something that I do until, kind of deep into flower. I think that the tendency to pull back on nitrogen too early for a lot of strains just causes them to yellow out. And I mean, not so much stunt, but most varieties like a bit of it. And normally, I mean, in terms of nutrition programs, lines that pull the nitrogen out of the A and B, say if they have a bloom formula, will typically add it back in the form of a calcium nitrate based cal mag product. Because plants yellow out from lack of cal and mag, but they also yellow out a lot more from lack of nitrogen. So yeah, that's why I would prefer something, say, like fish meal early in flower over purely fish bone meal early in flower, because I get a bit more of the nitrogen side of it with it, which is helpful. Frosty green trees. Always has the frostiest, greenest trees. I'm not sure if he sells Christmas trees yet, but, should get onto that. But yeah, try and pick stuff that's balanced. There might be a case in point where you've got a variety that's sort of really sensitive to that kind of thing. But yeah, generally speaking, most will appreciate a bit more than what they get. Which is why I think sometimes if people have only ever grown a clone on a bottled nutrient range, and then they grow it in a soil, you tend to get more of a genuine expression of the genetics, because it's not being pulled and pushed this way and that way by things that it kind of can't. It doesn't necessarily have a choice whether it wants to absorb them or not. I mean, there's a little bit of that with organics to an extent, but yeah, it's really difficult to kind of force feed things when you're not dealing with stuff that's immediately absorbable. Dr. Rhizo, I think you do mycelium and things like that, don't you, brother? The fungus among us. Just another fun guy. Okay, so I mean, that sort of covers a little bit of it anyway, I would probably do like a separate one on later flowering if that's of any interest. But yeah, and that's going to really depend on sort of what you're running, because that later part of it is kind of make or break too. But there's certain ones that are going to want more of a balanced approach for the next, say, so from the midpoint through till the later, there's only about 20% of flower left. They're going to want a bit more nitrogen. And then there's other ones that are going to sort of really want you to pull back on that to sort of ripen them out nice. Trent Marshall. So does anyone have any questions on said topic or any other topic this afternoon? This fine afternoon, 4:47. Oh, I had an incense stick here too. Oh, yes. I didn't even light it. It's the way. I thought I didn't bring a lighter in here. I was so bummed. So a lot of the time people tend to have the same combos in terms of I normally find a lot of people have similar combos of amendments, or, maybe a little bit less than what I use, but they'll have different proportions. So that's really the most interesting thing. Causa. So what, bro? How are your trees going? Have you solved said tent issue with airflow? No, so if you're using the aquamarine and you're using the island blend, just use that bloom formula. You don't need to grow with that bloom formula, because there is still nitrogen in that formula. It's lower in terms of the proportions than what it is in the grow formula, but there's still enough there to support growth. So no, you can just use that, rock that all the way through. Is totally fine. And I haven't found that it's full of so much nitrogen that it'll make things put out too much later leaf or anything like that. In fact, none of them really seem to really push that kind of growth. It seems to let the plant ripen out naturally, just supporting it while it wants it. But what I would say is that who was it? It was, I think, Surfbud was telling me that he's been running some stupid dose of or some really larger dose, about double what I run of the Ocean Potion, with just the regular dose of aquamarine. And yeah, just getting some absolutely just chunked out stuff with it. So yeah, pretty, I mean, people veer off script, and I like that, because I sort of, I'll push things, certainly. But yeah, oftentimes people will show me stuff with the products, and I'll be like, okay, well, that's a new one. I'll try that out. One from Grey Green Daddy. There you go. So yeah, not doing too well on the seedling front. Maybe try if they're older seeds, ma'am. Maybe try just cracking them in some, like, do the H2O2 wash, all that sort of stuff that I was talking about before. But don't soak for as long, and then try and germinate them in a set of those cotton pads, like the cotton makeup pads. Just crack them. Don't let the root actually come out, but just see if the root will actually crack, and then pop it in. You might have to do that if there's sort of some older ones, maybe, or you've had them sitting around for a minute. Suggestion for dry amendments. So yeah, I mean, a really simple combo is alfalfa meal, malted barley, and fish meal. If you add to that either your high peak guano or a bit of oyster lime, something with some calcium. So, whether it's calcium phosphate or whether it's calcium carbonate, or especially in a peat-based soil, something that's going to offer some sort of buffering and a bit more calcium, then that is a pretty economical and good combo. Yeah, and then you can sort of start playing around, adding other things to that. So stuff that has high amounts of good fats tends to promote fungi. So your hemp seed meal is a good candidate. Coconut meal is kind of a bit greasy, so that goes well in there. Crustacean meal, good for calcium as well, good for MPK. Insect frass, good for quality. Sort of, it's got a bit of nitrogen in it too, so yeah, pretty good. But yeah, if you had to keep it really simple, whole fish meal, yeah, goes pretty hard, man. And then yeah, you get your enzymes from your barley, even though it's only in low proportions, you still get some there. And yeah, growth compounds from your alfalfa. Throw a bit of kelp in there, you got some trace minerals and some cytokines and things too. And then you can kind of just experiment with proportions. I would say watch too much kelp, or watch really too much anything from the ocean, because it can be quite salty. So yeah, I mean, as long as your sodium's balanced with your other cations, then it can be at a level where it's a little bit higher, and not really affect things too badly. But yeah, I've definitely in the past, thinking more is more, run too much kelp in terms of kelp meal, not kelp extract. And yeah, the plants displayed everything that would look like they had a sodium toxicity. So that would be one that I would say it's kind of, you can go too far on. But in terms of like alfalfa is pretty hard to go overboard with, and even your malted barley, it can kind of, if it's ground, it can kind of get a little bit funky on the top of the soil. But I mean, yeah, I go pretty ham with that stuff, and don't have any problems. And Dr. Rizo is thinking of sticking some beans in. Yeah, man, get them going. Snizzlax and World of Grow. Cool. Thanks to people for joining. So I think, yeah, I think I might maybe mentioned on one of the other ones, but I like to pair a creature-based amendment with a plant-based amendment or two. I find that works really well. It kind of helps cut down the nutrient density of something like fish meal, which is quite rich, but lower in carbon. And then you've got stuff like your plant-based meals, which are really high in carbon and lower in nutrients. So those two together work really well. And then, yeah, having a calcium source there is just really useful for quality. And I myself used to do this kind of real bad, and that's focus on potassium, magnesium, and you have enough calcium there to kind of buffer your soil at the start, but you don't really factor in having massive reserves of it and how important that actually is as a driving factor in quality. And really, it's, especially for this particular plant, it seems to be the key is calcium availability and reserves over the crop cycle seem to make a huge impact on not only your yield, but also the quality of that yield. So that the structures themselves, the little crystallic structures that hold all the things that, we actually are after, seem to really need that and provide better structures. So in the terms of, if you're looking at, say, a full melt, or you're, pressing at the end, the difference is night and day in terms of if they have had adequate, healthy amounts throughout the crop cycle versus not. And it's not to do necessarily with overall total fertilizer. And you can run the same amount of total fertilizer, and if you don't have enough calcium, they can't use it all. So yeah, it really is a huge factor. Bill Superb Greens, it's cool to see you, dude. Yeah, I mean, mix it up a bit. You can start with sort of 1-to-1 proportions, right? So that's where most people will go. And then just fiddle around from there. I would say maybe keep your kelp on the lower side, though. But don't go ham with that stuff, because their little goes a long way. It's quite, I mean, even the trace minerals it's got, they're pretty rich. Oswald and Outback Organics, cool to see you guys. And yeah, I agree. You shouldn't really need the kelp, especially if you've amended with it prior. And especially if you're using things like rock dusts. So if you're using palagonite, volcanic ash, basalt, any of those things that provide a huge amount of minerals, then yeah, you should have a lot of trace minerals there, because azomite, all that sort of stuff. It has the minerals all there. So you shouldn't necessarily need to apply trace minerals from kelp. So if you're worried about that, you may be pushing your sodium levels a bit, which if you use a lot of stuff from the ocean, it can be easy to do. Yeah, just don't include it. Use more barley. Yeah, because like I said, it's hard to go overboard on that one. Coconut meal, kind of hard to go overboard on that one. Alfalfa, kind of hard to go overboard on that one. If you apply those too thick, sometimes you'll just get that slimy thing happen if you don't have a mulch layer over the top of it. But yeah, even then, it doesn't last long. And yeah, pelagonite for the win. I actually, if I need it to be super, super available, and I do a bit of this with the Stone Age, like the varied particle size of it is good because some of it, will weather and break down for years. Whereas, other is made available quite faster because it's smaller. But I'll actually micronize some. So some of what's in the Stone Age and some of what I use for my personal stash with pelagonite, I'll actually micronize right down to where it's almost like talc. And yeah, that seems to works really well in compost teas, but works really well in soils. And yeah, some people are against azomite. I get it. But it's a really useful soil amendment in terms of you get some things from it that you don't get from other things. And I wouldn't necessarily base a soil's trace mineral package, for instance, like entirely on that. But I've run A and B batches, crops, all the rest of it without. And yeah, you kind of always seem to notice when it's not in there. So yeah, it's one of those things that you use a bit of it. But because it's got to come a long way for us, like it's got to come all the way from damn Utah over here. Yeah, I sort of try and use the bulk of stuff from things that are available more locally. Luckily for us, we've got some really old volcanoes. So pelagonite's a good example of something that's available here in Australia, and it's different from the basalt that I get as well. And both are very high in their paramagnetic value. So if you believe in the sort of biodynamic woo, which I think there's some element of truth to, yeah, it'll sort of work. How do I micronize it? Well, I mean, how I used to break stuff up was I just used to bash oyster shells and things like that with a really heavy sledgehammer. But these days I have a mill, so I mill stuff. We've gone electric. But I mean, you can just bash and sieve and bash and sieve and bash and sieve. As long as it's dry weather, you won't get very far if it's humid. But yeah, you can do that. If you're making small amounts for small batches of soil, that's certainly an option. And yet, while some of the trace minerals that are available in some of these rock minerals haven't necessarily been demonstrated to have any effect on plant growth, there's a lot of that sort of stuff with human nutrition too, or animal nutrition, where they kind of distill it down, and you might have Centrum, and that's got your supposed list of trace minerals and things that all a healthy human body needs. But I mean, if you just try and live on that stuff and food that's devoid of nutrition, you kind of run out of steam pretty quick because there's stuff missing. So I think that is the more complex picture. That really it's hard to pin down in studies, but definitely seems to, because if you look at, for instance, grapes or different crops that grow in different areas, the soil biology and the soil ecology, all the things that make up that soil, a lot of those varying trace minerals are a big part of that, really seems to influence the produce that comes out of those areas. And so that's where my thought with when we're building our soils is to try and have a diverse range of that stuff in there, so that you sort of, and I like to try and go as old. So in terms of the basalt, like I've got a really old one, some old ass rocks, and pelagonite's pretty damn old too. But yeah, trying to have some diverse ranges of stuff in there with the thought that, it seems to influence flavor, terpene expression, those sort of things, over just picking one source. So while a basalt might have all of the things that I need in there, yeah, mixing it up a little bit, having a more diverse range of things seems to allow for a more diverse expression from a wider variety of plants. That's just my observation. Other people might beg to differ on that, and that's totally fine. But yeah, that's kind of what I think with that sort of stuff. And I think too, with your choice of other amendments, diversity is key. So I sort of have a pretty stupid list of stuff on the back of the full spec bag, especially. But yeah, I like it that way. It seems to work well that way. Not to say you can't do a lot with less, though. Someone was asking me through the week about ways to sort of get magnesium into mixes without just using Epsom salts. So magnesium sulfate obviously is like pretty soluble. It's going to wash through your mix fairly quickly. That might be one, in terms of just thinking about applying your magnesium separately. You can try and piggyback that in with other things. So you might be going to supplement potassium anyway. Well, you could use langbeinite, and then you're going to, potassium magnesium sulfate. You're going to piggyback some magnesium in there along with your potassium. Say your mix has got adequate levels of calcium, but it needs a tiny bit more buffering. You can use magnesite, so that'll actually raise your pH slightly because it is a carbonate, but it'll contribute some magnesium to your mix. So yeah, you can sort of, I don't know, try and get it in there through other sources rather than just trying to use, because I mean magnesium sulfate will work, but it's not going to stick around in your mix for a very long time. So that can sort of make stuff run out of steam. Frosty green trees there, using a wide range of inputs at low doses and about every 3 to 4 weeks. Yeah, which is about really all you should need to supplement. With the full strength soils, I don't really, top dress much more than that. With the light soils, yeah, I will, but they're more supplement intensive by nature. It's kind of their benefit. So it's their, I don't know, it's not a bug, it's a feature, whatever Jobs used to say. But yeah, for those. But yeah, little and often seems to work better than a huge dose all at once. And yeah, we'll use we use a bit of kieserite in some of our mixes, which is a magnesium which hangs around for longer in your soil, so it sort of breaks down at a slower rate. So there's various different ways, but yeah, it's important to not just be applying that just by itself. Any of your minerals like that, you need to apply with other cations to make sure that you're not displacing other things. So it's think of it more like a moving chessboard in terms of you move one piece and everything else on the board moves. So that's kind of how it works with your relation of your calcium, your potassium, your magnesium, your sodium, those kind of cations. So yeah, if you just start adjusting one thing willy-nilly, you can limit or affect the availability of other things. And then beyond that, your trace minerals affect how well your plant can absorb those. So that's where, yeah, trying to make sure that things are there in the right proportions and that you're not just going crazy applying too much of any one thing. Because you can put stuff in real easy and then it's hard to take it out. You can't necessarily just flush your soil. The Seeker of, can you ask how to mix Rhizomojo? You just mix that into your water, my dude. So that's a fully soluble product. So just what I normally do is I'll fill the tank or the watering can or the bucket, whatever I'm going to use to water with, sprayer, with my water, and then I'll drop the dose of Rhizomojo right in that, and it'll normally dissolve straight away. Give that a quick stir/shake, and that's just fine. I don't generally tend to have to shake that one up in like a protein shaker or anything like I would say with the Green Supreme or the Aquamarine or the Ocean Potion. So yeah, that's fine. It's not necessarily, in terms of if you're thinking to mix it with your soil, it's not necessarily for that. Although some people have taken to root dusting clones with it, which is showing some pretty insane results. But yeah, that's something that I'm verifying independently. But yeah, that product was designed as a soluble, so just mix it up, water it in. And so not necessarily like the dark matter. The dark matter is a mycorrhizal. It's more of a soluble, flowable powder. So it doesn't necessarily dissolve in the water, but it's of a fine enough micron to where it'll float and be dispersible in water. So yeah, but you can apply that one just as easily I like to dust a little bit in the hole, and then I will turn the root ball sideways and just kind of pepper a little bit on the root system and then just whack it in there. Boom. Water that in. Green Supreme and Mojo is a good combo for watering in with, and you should be off to the races. No problem, my dude. That is totally fine. So yeah, some of our stuff, it may be a little confusing, but some of the stuff we do is fully soluble, so it's designed to be mixed up and watered in. And then other stuff we do is designed to be either mixed with your soil or applied to the surface of your soil. So I wouldn't necessarily try and dissolve Herbs Superb and Stone Age in a watering can, because it wouldn't go too well. And I wouldn't necessarily mix Aquamarine in with the dirt. Not saying that you can't, but yeah. Some people have been trying the pre-dilution technique that we sort of talked about the other week too. So that's good. Hopefully no one's mistaken a shaker full of Mojo or Aquamarine for something edible. One there from Grey Green Daddy. Dust the hole so you can see it better. Yeah, it's the color of dark matter too is sort of, I find, pretty visible, especially if I spill it on the ground. So if I spill it on the damn carpet or something like that, it's visible for quite a while. The wind's just kicked up crazy outside. Wonder if we're going to get a huge storm blowing. It doesn't seem to affect this current internet though. The last one, it used to like drop out immediately. Someone asked me before if you can apply the microbes at the same time as stuff like your Aquamarine and your Ocean Potion. And yeah, you can. There's no reason why you can't put those in the same dose. I tend to favor things like the Mojo over stuff like the antimatter and the dark matter. And I tend to like to separate antimatter and dark matter applications. But if it works out that dose that week lines up with when you're going to use a microbe product, I haven't noticed any detriment to using it, and they still seem to work just as effective. So yeah, they don't seem to be deadly. Flying kites. And you can. So that's actually something. So Greg Grenetti asked if you can, instead of using castings or compost, to mix with your dry amendments, moisten down and to pre-activate, if you can just use soil. And yeah, certainly you can. So just like you can brew a microbe tea with soil, dirt tea, you can use that way. And yeah, it works quite well. The good thing about that is there's a real difference between how much moisture worm castings and your soil hold. So sometimes if you go a bit ham and then you've got a good mulch layer on top, you can kind of just have this real thick layer on top of your soil that seems to limit the amount of oxygen and things that can get through, depending, just if you go too hard. So using soil, it doesn't really change it that much, and those amendments break down. So it's a good way of, if you veg things for a while and you start mother plants, for instance, where you start getting exposed roots on the surface, it's a good way to top that up as well as sort of give them a fresh charge. But it's not going to add as much carbon and things like that as what pure castings would. So it depends on what you're doing. But if it's fresh dirt, there's plenty of nutrition in that, and plenty of microbes too. It's so loaded with microbes. A couple of people have been brewing some teas and putting the dark matter in at the end of the tea rather than putting it in at the start. And yeah, I got some photos through the week inbox to me that were just real fluffy white growth that had sort of started on top of the soil. And the last couple of times they'd done it, they didn't get that. So yeah, it's cool to see some of the stuff we talk about on here creeping out. Warrigange, cool to see you, brother. How was your trip to Canada? Did you see your Canadian cousins? They won't let you back in now, will they? You ran that much of a muck. They're just like, nah, they stamped your passport. I would, yeah. So what I meant was, if you go to the point of putting like a real thick layer on top of your soil of just castings and amendments, yeah, it can kind of smother things out a little bit because it's just going to be this real thick caked layer up on top of there. So yeah, whether or not that's beneficial, or sometimes that can make things stay too wet too long, and that's a bit of a problem. So yeah, not going ham that way. And if you need to top up that much, then the soil, mixing the soil with it is probably a better way, or just topping up and then adding your top dressing on top if you don't mind waiting. Was so good. That's good. That's wicked. I'll be keen to get the highlights. The highlight reel. But yeah, you've got to go pretty ham with either compost or castings to completely smother your soil. But it is something to keep an eye on because it's a different structure and everything to what the rest of your pot is. Seems to work really well on sub-irrigated stuff though. So I think GGG is going that way, or has already gone that way. You might find with that it's actually really of benefit because there's a bit of a discrepancy between the moisture at the bottom and the moisture in the very top of your topsoil. So having a little layer up on top of there with a mulch layer over the top of it can be really good. It's just like anything. It's easy to go too far. Warrigange has got some killer photos coming. I never thought I would see the day. He's been like the ultimate auto guy for the last, like, God, since I've known of him. So yeah, that's photo periods. I'm excited for that. He's always run photos too, but he's a lot of notable photo period work. There was some marathon OG that he did, and a few other things that have been, yeah, really, really nice work. Warrigange, that is. But yeah, swapping to photos, that'll offer some interesting stuff because just more opportunity to train, save in terms of if you want to run things again. Yeah, that can, sometimes people that run the same cut for a while find things about it that they definitely wouldn't have found in the first run. Dr. Jimbo Jones, speaking of someone who has the fire. Warrigange, get back to your roots, run some photos. I agree. And Frosty Green Trees feels weird watching it at this time of the afternoon. Yeah. Well, But hey, what matters is like I get on here and do them. I can't always make them the exact same time every week, but I try and make them on a Sunday. And yeah. And by the way, I had a story that I made and like uploaded at like 10:30 this morning, and then I checked the phone and it's like still uploading. So it let people know 20 minutes before the live was on, when it was supposed to let people know, like, hours before. Super awesome technology, and awesome of me to notice that 20 minutes before the live. Great. Geordie Craig. So, yeah, I appreciate some people coming on anyway this time of the afternoon. Hanging out for a bit. So, yeah, we might try and get one more question in if anyone's got any. And then I'll skedaddle. Go and cause some ruckus before tomorrow, before I'm back at work. We made some island blend through the week. Stocked up on the herbs of herbs. Yeah. Filled up a lot of tins. Thank you to everyone who's been getting the Cali tins, caddy tins. Munchos. I get the core crowd, but there's a different crowd at this time of the afternoon, which is pretty cool. Aussie stoners. Yeah, and yeah, the perpetual blue mat versus sub-irrigated question keeps coming up all the time. This is one there. I don't know, man. It's getting pretty hard to beat this sub-irrigated business, but I can appreciate where that's not going to suit everything. So yeah, I guess it depends on your situation, but I think these days I'm leading towards the subs, becoming a submarine man. And yeah, going good, Aussie. Going good, mate. See, it depends. I would say if you've got, multiple plants and you need to have fabric pots and things like that, then yeah, definitely the blue mats are going to be a more flexible option for you. Smaller plants too. Situations where things are going to do well running off that. Don't forget there's also your auto pots. So they can sort of, fill in for a lot of that stuff. A lot of people use those for their mother plants with pretty good effectivity. But yeah, I mean, in terms of flowering plants, like just some of the results I'm seeing, it's hard not to at least suggest people look at that. And simplicity too. It counts for something. But someone who's taught me some good tricks on the blue mats lately has been Otto. So Otto's Gardening Palace, Otto's Pot Palace. He's sort of figured out some pretty good tricks that he's been sharing with me. One of them is sort of soaking them properly if they appear to not be outputting. Yeah, that's solved some of the frustrations that I've kind of had with them, because they work well until they don't work so well, and then they annoy the hell out of you, has been my experience. Well, yeah, I look forward to seeing what things Warrigange mucks around with first off the back of this Canadian trip, because they've kind of been pushing things ahead there for quite a while. I mean, they, especially in the early 2000s, late 90s, doing a lot of stuff there, like all the beasters and stuff like that for sure. But yeah, like they're just varieties up there. Like I was a huge fan of Remo in the early days, but just huge amounts of crosses. There's been a lot of cool and notable varieties come out of there, but they don't always get a lot of press. So boots on the ground style, I would be interested to know kind of some of the more unique stuff that's getting around. Like I know they'll have cookies and OG and all these sort of things like that are sort of super common in the US dispo scene. But yeah, what are some of the like local favorites, things that maybe are a bit of a local flavor, something that's, a little bit different. That would be kind of some of the stuff. I think they would probably have some unique fire up there. Cocoa Garden or Sip Life. Yeah, sub-irrigated life. It's pretty good, like if you've got the room for it, it's worthwhile doing. Every grow that I see that's running it that way with full spec or whatever. I mean, there's people using Island Blend, there's people using light soil, all sorts of stuff. It doesn't seem to really matter. It just seems to be a really good way of doing it. And yeah, I would agree, Dr. Jimbo Jones has his blue mat styled really well. But it is important to mention, and he has said this to me before, that he uses those to sort of fill in between when he manually waters. So he still supplements with manual watering, either by a watering can or with a watering wand. So they're not doing 100% of the job. But yeah, they definitely seem to maintain stuff well enough to where it influences your quality a lot. And you yield. Like he pulls some tremendous yields out of some pretty compact spaces, which is great. Especially, in soil. For years, people said, "Oh, you don't get yields indoors in soil," which is just rubbish. Of course you can. Like, a lot of big grows overseas, that's kind of how they've gone now, because it's expensive to try and pull big yields with barrels of salts. So yeah. But yeah, so I mean, with Jimbo though, that suits his particular grow style, because that in between manual watering allows him the opportunity to use solubles and microbes and things like that he can apply via drench. So that, having a really good solid base there in terms of the soil, and then applying things throughout, seems to really work well. Yield and quality. It's kind of, you can't really ask for much more than that. That is something that's a tiny bit hard. I keep coming back to that, to the point of, like, I'm doing a separate supplementation / feed chart for sub-irrigated planters, because yeah, you've got to treat them a little bit differently than what you would a top-down watering situation, where you've got sort of a, it's not run to waste because you don't really have much runoff, but you know what I mean. Mix and go. Yeah, mixing up stuff and watering it in. Yeah, so it tends to be more top dress centric that way, and then careful applications of solubles, and antimatter in the res seems to be the ticket, the secret to keeping all the wrong kind of funk out there. I mean, funk is a lifestyle, and we definitely need that funk. We've got to have that funk, but it's got to be the right sort of funk. It can't be the wrong funk. Because if you got the wrong funk in that res, then yeah, your plants aren't going to do that well. So yeah, applying organisms that don't want to live in an anaerobic environment to an anaerobic environment, yeah, you can pretty quickly end up with something that's the wrong kind of funk. But yeah, the antimatter seems to act as an effective defunkifier, or at least a good funk converter. So yeah, actually, I was thinking of frosty green trees just then when I said about sub-irrigated planters and not having the space, because he's a smaller sort of size. Like, he's got like a fairly, they're not tiny, but they're not huge either. I mean, what are those damn things? They're like an 11 or 12 liter sub-irrigated. So yeah, and if you just go and look at these dudes' pages, it's impressive, to say the least. You would swear years ago that they were running like Nutrient Flow or something like that, but they don't look that plastic green. Like, they look like a real green, like how plants should look, because they're not just loaded with nitrates and filled to the gills with salt. And yeah, so Jimbo, I kind of, at the suggestion of someone, they suggested a particular enzyme product, and I thought, well, I don't make that one. So I have antimatter, and just on a hunch, I put it in the reservoir, because I'd gone a bit crazy applying aquamarine and things like that, and some of that I think had drained off into the sub-irrigated's reservoir and had caused some of that bad funk. And so, yeah, I applied some antimatter in there, and then the next day there was no detectable bad funk at all. So yeah, it cleaned that up. It cleaned that up a lot. G'day Jordan and g'day Sunners. 13 gal. 13 gal. So wait a minute. Oh, that's actually a decent size, man. That's, yeah, okay. So it's just the plants are huge then, and they make the pots look small. Because like the way they're growing, like it looked like a small space with smaller containers. But yeah, I mean, if they're 49 liters, then yeah, it must just be like this plant and container, and it makes your tent and everything like that look tiny. because it made the lamp, like everything just looked, yeah, disproportionate. So yeah, that's even more impressive. That's totally rad. That's totally rad. Some of the guys I've found, they've let their plants veg out for a while, and they're like, impressive canopies on them, but they're filling that reservoir part of it like almost every day. Like the plants are drinking it basically every day. And you're talking about, 8-9 liters. So it's like drinking 9 liters basically out of the res a day, which is just, yeah, it's crazy. Like I would never water that much in terms of from the top. Like normally that would be so much. But yeah, that's what they're going through. And main stems on them that look ridiculous. So just huge, thick, tree-like main stems. Yeah, it's definitely funny. Yeah, so Jimbo, try the antimatter as kind of a cleaning thing. So as much as it's a microbe product, and a lot of that's going to benefit your soil once it gets into it, it's important to kind of note that there's like a really powerful suite of enzymes in that product that are designed to kind of go in there and break down all that bad stuff that can kind of just hang around and cause bad biofilm buildup. So not only, so a lot of your enzyme products are going to break down cellulose. So yeah, they'll break down some dead root material and stuff, things that are plant-based. But enzymes can only break down what they can break down. So a cellulitic enzyme is not going to do much for your proteins or your fats or things of that nature that can also accumulate as biofilm. So for that, you need protease, so your proteolytic enzymes. You need lipase, so lipolic enzymes. So things that can, so proteases will break down proteins to amino acids, which are then able to be absorbed and utilized. Same as with your fats, it'll break those down from fats into fatty acids, which can be utilized. So it's about breaking apart those bonds and not leaving too much stuff around for pathogens and horrible stinky stuff to try and break it down and produce harmful byproducts instead. So yeah, you kind of get the food along with not pathogens that come along with it, which are not going to really benefit your soil. Yeah, I mean, I totally misjudged the look of your plants, Frosty Green Trees, man. I really thought that it was like a 2x4. Yeah, I thought it was like a 2x4, and that we had like 11-liter sips in there, and that was just like a mad, packed out, compact situation. I didn't realize that you had like 49-liter ones there, and that you having to zip tie them to the damn ceiling and stuff like that. It's mighty impressive. It's mighty impressive, actually. Yeah. So get on that, especially if you're new to it, and you're just setting up. Like, really think about that. And for years and years and years, I've purely recommended fabric pots, but lately, especially if you're just getting into soil and all the rest of it, you want just a simple approach to it. That way, I'm telling you, it works quite well. Geordie James, nice to see you. So yeah, while it's not necessarily a water treatment product, the antimatter, it definitely is one of those go-tos for me if I'm a bit suspect on stuff. And yeah, it seems to be wildly effective. Works really well and synergizes really well with your top dressings too, so it's going to help break down those things faster. But yeah, I think sometimes people get confused with it between it and the dark matter, and so your dark matter is more of a mycorrhizal situation. But the antimatter, yeah, more think of it along the lines of an enzyme product, but something that's breaking down a lot more stuff than your average enzyme product. And then you can sort of see where the utility of it comes along quite handy. Really good for pathogen prevention as well. Just woke up at 5:30. Oh my lord, you must have had a good night, dude. Well, props to that. Fist bump. Thank you for joining. I'm probably not going to be on for too much longer, though, is the only drama. But, I appreciate you joining regardless. 4x4, 210 centimeter tent, 7.5 week veg. Yeah, okay. So yeah, that's way larger than I thought it was. Props to you, man. Fist bumps. Yeah. Yeah, good job, dude. That's rocking. That's rocking hard. And yeah, we did suggest on one of the other ones, like he's running reservoirs that run out almost on the daily. So in that, he's been applying some of the solubles in that, which have been kind of wicking up. That's kind of different to if you have, say, a res that's going to last 2 or 3 days. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily recommend the same if that's not being replenished super quick. Oh, okay. WA time. Yeah, no, I didn't even think of that, dude. Yeah, I forget that there's daylight savings, no daylight savings, and like that Australia is as big as America and all that sort of thing. You know, it's sort of. Oh, well, thank you for coming on. Green Out team. Yeah, cool. Nice to see you, dude. And Didamo. Oh, and Legalize. Nice to see you. They're spreading the word of the herb. So shout outs to that. I think there's an opportunity to vote on said things. So, you know, if that's something you're passionate about, do that. Geordie James, what is my favorite length of veg? It depends on the variety. So basically the variety stretch potential, the size of the space. If it's a 3x5 situation, generally I'll probably veg for about 4 or 5 weeks. It's about the most. That gives me an opportunity to go through, like, you know, a decent building phase in the seedling phase. Good length of veg with maybe a little supergrass added in there to sort of get like a little bit of training in there as well. I tend to find works out well for most of your modern hybrids. There's situations where, like, there's a blueberry that I absolutely love. Really into bred, not very vigorous. And so that one might need 6-7 weeks of veg to be at a decent size, but it only stretches by 10 to 20% in flower. So kind of an outlier. But most of your stuff that's going to shoot up by 50 to 70 to 100%, like, you know, yeah, anywhere between 4 and 6 weeks is plenty. Absolutely plenty. But yeah, that'll vary based on, like, that's in a rectangular format. So you would probably run multiple in that, either 2 or 3. If you have a square, you may either choose to run one larger container if you've got a decent height in your enclosure, and veg for a little while longer, or you can run, you know, 3 or 4 veg for a similar amount of time. In general, though, I think running a veg length that is only as long as it needs to be is the best way. So not hanging out in there for an unnecessary amount of time. Oh man, there's always sorts of testing things going on. My favorite of all time is blueberry, and it always will be. It's the best one. So let's say that. I think there's certain ones that it's difficult to really better than them. You just sort of get to a point where everything's just kind of a level of good, and yeah, there's not really too much beyond that echelon. And he's in a 1.5. Okay, so yeah, that's a 5x5. So that's a decent size, man. You would be able to put 4 in there, no worries. Yeah, so, you know, 3 or 4. And yeah, depending on the height of that, would depend on how long. But I think for that size space, for, you know, your modern hybrids, yeah, go shoot for about 4 to 6 weeks veg, and you'll do really good. 40-litre pots as a minimum, and you'll do well. And yeah, some definite votes there for blueberry. It's one of those sort of Midas touch varieties too, where anything it touches, it improves markedly. So there's various different things that I think are really only made good because they've got that bit of blue in there. Otherwise, they'd be pretty rank average. It's a special one. You know, there's some of those ones that are desert island things, and you don't really need much more than that. But there's always something new. You know, there's various different combinations these days, and certainly the showiness of things now is, you can tell stuff that looks older school now to the stuff, and it all looks good to me, because you got to appreciate that diversity in it, just like you would with nature. So you appreciate different sunrises and sunsets, you appreciate different bird life, you appreciate different plant life. So with that, it's important to sort of not get locked into everything must look like one thing. But you can definitely tell the stuff that was bred, say, pre-2010 and stuff that's kind of come about post-2010. They have like it's a different sort of a look. Different separation and back crossing and things like that that's kind of going on. But yeah, it all looks good, you know, like and people shy away from some of those older things as though they're outdated. But keep in mind that everything modern is built on stuff from yesteryear. So yeah, there's the showiness, the kind of the grammability, like how many likes they get, whatever. That definitely has gone up. But in terms of effect, flavor, all that sort of stuff like that, there's plenty of stuff that's 30 years, 40 years old at this point that can well hang, even to the point of being revered by people. It's kind of rarer these days that you have something that like cuts right through. I tend to find actually a lot of the flavors these days are all jumbled up. So you'll have, I don't know, it's like if you made a smoothie of different things, you can taste this, that, the other, and there'll be something that's dominant, but it's kind of 10 different things all at once, which is cool. Fruit salad is cool. Fruit salad is tasty, but sometimes you just want a damn banana. Sometimes you just want an apple. One there for blueberry headband. So yeah, that'll be nice. I mean, headband was always cool. Cherry lights. Yeah, so the cherry ones, actually, that's a newer kind of flavor. Like, it may have existed years ago, but it certainly wasn't something that I came across until like after 2010. But those real cherry flavors they're special. There was I think a cherry Garcia that I tried that someone had that was, amazing. But again, looks-wise amazing, flavor-wise amazing, effects-wise, okay. Like in terms of, just wasn't necessarily my cup of tea that way. And a lot of people looking for that bag appeal. A lot of people looking for the alien plants, the space plants, the kind of outer space looking stuff, and I can certainly agree with that. But yeah, I mean, also too, if you're ordering a lot of those older things, they're good value, because they're not as hot anymore. So yeah, look some of those things up. Like, seriously, man, it's like a lot of the stuff that people were just frothing on years ago. It's the base of a lot of things that exist today. You can kind of see it. Like, if you've kind of been around it long enough, you can see this plus that equals those kind of things in terms of structure and growth habit and all that, kind of even, taste, flavor, or all that kind of thing. So yeah, if you're the sort that kind of likes to muck around that way, or you're interested in kind of more of those classic tastes, there's definitely, like, there's less in terms of huntability. Like, you'll find a lot of the older ones are more uniform, they're more stable. But they're also tend to be more locked in terms of their taste. So they will have sort of one quite dominant taste that kind of is representative of the line. So that can be cool, that can be kind of cool to have in your collection, something that reliably produces a particular experience and taste. Some votes there for the OG skunk for sure. The stuff that was your neighbor 2 houses over would be like, what the hell's going on? It was always a lot of fun. Anything GGD can get to complete the flower run, man, I think you're ready to go. Hey, like, I mean, you've got your sub-irrigateds going on, you've improved your space, you've popped some new genetics. Like, yeah, I really think that you dialed. Like, I think you've got all the stuff on deck that you would need to use. It's just send it. And Jimbo remembers when purple was sold at a pretty... Well, that's because everything's purple now. So, you know, it's not special anymore because every goddamn person's got purple. So, but yeah, I mean, like Savage and all that, like Master P, like all those guys back in the day who were rapping about that perp. It kind of blew it up for a little while there. And yeah, I love purple stuff because it always seems to have that purple taste. And it is a taste, like it's a particular, this kind of sweet. Every variety seems to have it in one form or another, whether it's muted or whether it's really, really prominent, but it always seems to be in it. So yeah, one thing about purples though, I tend to find they're not quite as strong as their green counterpart. But yeah, the perps used to be a real thing. Like, you know, it was like a real special, like, oh my God, wow, it's goddamn purple. And now it's like, oh man, like every goddamn thing's purple. You'd have to have it be like orange or like, you know, bright red or something like that for it to really stand out. And even then, like there's some space looking stuff now that's kind of all mixes of rainbow. And that's getting more and more and more common. So yeah, soon it'll be, if your stuff's green, it's at a premium because it's like, oh, I haven't seen that in 10 years. Like green with orange hairs used to be the predominant archetype of most things. And now it's kind of, yeah, all over the place. Someone with some Panama. Yeah, well, I mean, Panama's a nice one. That was kind of one of the old Cannabaigan. They used to have a good one. Also, Panama DC was a terrific one that they used to do. Go Green Daddy, it's going to get sent harder than a package out of a Star Trek semi. So, yeah, that's pretty hard, dude. I mean, those dudes know how to yeet a package out of a truck. Yeah, a lot of that kind of stuff from... Yeah, I mean, again, classic varieties, old varieties. That's going to be good for your flavs. So yeah, intricate and interesting flavors and resilience, toughness, all that sort of stuff. Anything that's been grown for a lot of generations by a lot of people and been subjected to the elements, you'll generally tend to find has that toughness, because if it doesn't survive, it doesn't make it to be in the generation. So that's where, I mean, you'll find stuff these days, a lot of the stuff that's bred in an indoor environment can be all over the place in terms of its resistance, because, I mean, hey, if you've got a perfect environment and you can make up for the genetic flaws of the variety, you're probably not going to see that. The trouble is that a lot of people in the real world don't have an ideal situation, and so things stray slightly outside the norm, and depending on what it is, it can go to crap. So... Pink Panama, that sounds like a cool one. Yeah, I mean, I think that is one of the better things. So, God, 15, 20 years ago, it was all about, you know, how tight and, you know, almost indica-like everything could be. And that's a shame, because not everything actually grows that way. And then that also led to the whole PGR, you know, mess that was going on and still continues to go on. Because yeah, people were wanting that ultra chunky look, and look, not all stuff does that. Some stuff, its expression is to grow open and kind of, you know, more spaced out and fluffy. And yeah, all of that diversity should be celebrated. You don't want to have things mono, you know, everything looking the same. There's no fun in that. So yeah, a lot of that stuff years ago, bred for that, you know, might have been big and ultra dense and all those sort of things, but didn't have a lot of character.
didn't have a lot of flavor, wasn't really tremendous on effect. And a lot of your stuff that you find is just wild in terms of expression of flavor and taste, and just these amazing soaring effects, comes with a variety that just kind of looks a bit shaggy and kind of a bit all over the place. But yeah, that's what comes along with it. So you should celebrate that. And also realize that is just as good a quality if it's well grown as something that came out ultra dense and all the rest of it. Same as some varieties aren't hyper frosty. Like when you look at things like cookies, when you actually look at them under a microscope, you find that they've got pretty much the same amount of glands. It's the stalk of the gland is like really long. And so it kind of creates this illusion of where it's like, oh, wow, look at how hyper frosted that is. But it's kind of just everything is on a longer stick. So, I mean, yeah, there's a lot packed on there. But at the same time, like, it's just more that the gland heads are larger and they're on a long stalk. So it's kind of a bit of an optical illusion with certain things. Whereas an older variety, for instance, like some of your old Durbans used to have like a fairly compact trichome head on a really short little stalk, which is really handy for, like, they reckon that it ended up that way because of it was resistant to handling, so it sort of doesn't break off and end up stuck to everything else except the flower. But yeah, it still has a lot of overall coverage, but it's just not as prominent looking. But yeah, that's cool. I could probably chat all day about that sort of stuff, though. So yeah. But anyway, yeah, thank you everybody for joining us for a late one today. I really appreciate it. And I hope some people got some information about sort of maximizing your early flower. Especially at the moment, it's sort of the outdoor season is winding up. And so depending what you're doing, some things might be a bit deeper into that, or some things might be right in that phase. So that might give you some sort of inspiration to go out there and, do some positive stuff for your soil and your garden and your plants and your bottom line. But yeah, next week I'll try and go over a bit of later flower stuff. Yeah, that kind of that whole tail end of it. Let's drop into that a little bit, talk about that sort of stuff before we kind of get into dealing with the post-harvest end of it. It's probably the next thing after that. So yeah, until then, I appreciate everybody coming on and being awesome, and I'll catch you next week for more fun and games on another Sunday sesh.